Welcome to another episode of This Week with Sabir. We have an exciting news today to share with our audience and fans of This Week with Sabir. We actually have a sponsor, and it's the right kind of a sponsor. It goes right through my heart, and it's actually the very streaming platform that we are using on every show since the show started. So this is new features and stuff like that. So I highly recommend you guys check out restream.io. And in the show description, you'll see a special offer link for our fans from our friends at restream.io. And they will give you a special offer if you click on that special This Week with Sabir link. And today in our hot seat is Bryan Mattimore. Bryan is the co-founder and chief idea guy of Growth Engine Company, a 20-year-old innovation and creativity training agency based in Westport. In his marketing consulting career, Bryan has managed over 200 successful innovation projects. Let me just give you context here. That's leading over $3 billion with a B in new sales. And here's the more impressive thing. One third of the Fortune 100 companies. And also, Bryan, I love books. So Bryan is an amazing author. He has written several best-selling books. I would like to share one of them here on the screen with you. You guys definitely, it is available on Amazon. You should check it out. It's 21 Days to a Big Idea. We will be discussing this book today during the show. So stay tuned. So that's 21 Days to a Big Idea by Bryan Mattimore. He is a cum laude graduate of Dartmouth with a major in psychology, innovation, and he's also a marketing instructor at Caltech. The only thing I know about Caltech, I know it's an amazing institution, but my favorite show is Big Bang Theory, and all of those guys actually go and teach at or research at Caltech. Well, Bryan, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Sabir. And just so your audience knows, I'm a marketing and innovation instructor there, but there's no way I could get in, just so you know.
Thank you for being here. I mean, the thing is, we have very overlapping circles of friends that recommended us to each other to kind of explore this. And the kind of the topic that we will be discussing today would be creating, developing, and launching successful new products and services, especially kind of keeping an eye on ideation, right? So first of all, I want to raise my hand and say I've heard terms like ideation, let's brainstorm, let's do whiteboarding session, a lot of fancy schmancy words, right? So, yep. But before we go into that, how did you get started? Let's spend like maybe 5 minutes. How did you get started 20 years ago down this path?
Well, I wish it were only 20 years ago. No, actually, I appreciate all the experience for more than 20 years. I grew up in an entrepreneurial household. My dad was an idea guy. He had been in the ad business. He created Say Pepsi Please tagline, which was a most successful radio contest ever created. And then he went on to form Sammy, which some of your older audience members may know became the #2 research firm in the country behind Nielsen. He was an entrepreneur, so he didn't get rich, but what it did for me is it created a love of ideas and entrepreneurship. And so I would, suck his brain dry every day that I could and learn his processes, and I became fascinated with it. So really, I've devoted my life to understanding the creative process, but more importantly, how to specifically apply it for real-world results.
Oh, very cool. Now, I've been involved. I mean, my innovation and products and services always has been in the e-commerce world, and then much later on, then came digital, then came social marketing and audience development and things of that nature. And creating products, and the way I view it is very different. The way I view it, because I think starting 20 years ago when you started with that, the mechanisms you have today of speeding up that process of testing and learning, I think, is phenomenal compared to how much investment you had to do, like let's say 20 years ago. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with you. The wonderful thing about the digital and e-commerce, quote, new products and services, oh my gosh, you could try, right? You go test market these things, do an A/B test or whatever it is, find out which is working, and you're off and running. And so the packaged goods guys, the consumer packaged goods guys, and we've done a lot in those areas. We've worked in all areas, finance, pharma, et cetera, et cetera. But, they've come to realize that, minimum viable product and, sort of quick to market kind of tests make a lot of sense. And so they adapted a lot of that thinking and methodologies because the world is changing so quickly. It's I don't know that you have a luxury in these days to spend a year and a half developing and launching a new product, frankly.
No, I think in a lot of those kind of situations, it tends to be an opinion of a person, whoever has that powerful title in the room, right? So let me explain. So the CMO or the CEO is the smartest person in the room. But that model has changed into, no, let the audience decide, because we are living in a consumer-centric world. It's no longer brand-centric.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And I frankly, I think the best clients are look for and are open to the consumer or customer input. If they're not, they're probably not going to last that long, especially in these times. And so, it's been, it's ironic that our best clients in some ways need us the least, because they understand the processes that we're trying to do, the approaches we take, and we are absolutely passionate about, if you will, beginning and ending with the consumer and their input, and they become partners in our development work, frankly. So we believe in a lot of qualitative research before we, validate it quantitatively.
Very cool. Now, by the way, thank you for the book. So the audience, I do have that book. One thing I would like you to take us through is, what does the ideation process look like when these clients are going through the process, the 21 days to big idea, right? And I love the way the book is actually laid out day by day. Like literally, it's one of those, it's like the don't sweat the small stuff. Every day there is something there. I love it how it's like builds up over throughout the book. So if you could take us through that.
Sure. Well, thank you. Well, there are actually two processes. One is this 21 days to a big idea process, and then there's our quote client consulting product process, iterative insight mining. But let's focus on 21 days to a big idea, because I wrote that specifically for entrepreneurs. And the genesis of this was Bob Dorff, who is famous in the world of lean innovation. He co-wrote Startup Owner's Manual with Steve Blank. He teaches at Columbia, and he said to me, he's been a friend for many years, and he said to me, my students at Columbia, they're really bright, the entrepreneurial school, but their ideas are generally pretty bad, frankly. He said, if I'm more a cuisine app, I'm going to shoot myself. And so he said, could you develop a process that would help them get more and better ideas? And so that was the start of it, and I did, and I presented at Columbia, and then we went over to Moscow at Skolkovo University, and then my literary agent heard me give a talk on it, and she said, well, that should be a book. And I said, well, as you know, I just wrote a book, Idea Stormers. I don't want to write another one. And she said, well, I think I can sell it. You don't have to write a proposal. So I did, and that's how that book came about. The basic, there's the Idea Stormers. Yeah. That was the one I had written before that. Which is kind of the masterwork, frankly, corporate folks. But for entrepreneurs, two insights that are really important for entrepreneurs, maybe more than two. One is certainly you want to be in an area of passion, right? Mm-hmm. So I start people out in to identify that, because entrepreneurship is hard, and if you're creating a business that you don't love or are passionate about it, my feeling is you'll probably fail and you'll probably give up. So you should start with, the key insight of the book is that you should not start with one idea in your areas of passion. You should really have 10 or 15 or 20. And so the book brings you through a whole range of creative thinking strategies and processes so that you can quickly develop a big idea, as I call it, every day for 21 days. So at the end of this process, you're going to have 20, you'll probably have 30 quote ideas. And from those, you'll for sure have one that's a big idea. The key is you may not know which one it is. And in fact, you probably won't. And so that's when you need to start talking to people, do the research, talk to potential consumers and customers, and they'll very quickly tell you which ideas are great and which are not so great.
Now, if you look at that's a scale, right? I mean, you're looking at you're looking at entrepreneurs, inventors that if they're lucky and the product is really good, it ends up on like Shark Tank or Kickstarter or something like that, right? Yes. And on the other hand of it, and so everything in the middle, but then you have all the way on the other side of it, companies like Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Mondelez, and other types of, whether it's CPG companies or it could be even B2B type companies. They're creating, they have their process. Does the process change as far as if you're a 1-person or 2-person founder team versus a $35 billion company?
It does in a way. So for the entrepreneur, identified 5 basic strategies. So one, the obvious one, is find a problem and solve it. But others are adapt to technology, figure out ways to help people or organizations self-actualize, figure out ideas to save money or be more efficient, and then another one is save time. So those are some basic premises that the entrepreneur use. When we were a Pepsi or CPG company or a pharma company or a service, it doesn't matter. They have established brands, and often they're trying to extend those brands in unique and sort of wonderful ways. And so then we are using specific, we call it focused ideation techniques, which is, of course, an oxymoronic term, right? But the idea is that we will use these different techniques to trigger ideas that could be aligned with either their brands or their particular business. And by the way, the techniques in 21 days to a big idea are also the techniques we use for our corporate clients. So some of those techniques could be, semantic intuition or problem redefinition or questioning assumptions or picture prompts or trend triggers, and on and on and on. We have dozens and dozens of these techniques we use, and we'll probably talk about a few of those as we work through today.
Very cool. Now, one of the things that I have seen, and you probably have heard, even with like Steve Jobs never surveyed consumers to think what they would be expecting from an Apple product, right? Yep. He went on his own and he said, okay, no, 10 years from now or 5 years from now, there will be a need for this thing. I'm going to create that thing, right? Actually, yep. If you think about the iPod, right, because that was a big innovation for the company, when they came up with the iPod, Apple was the last entry in the MP3 player market, but he didn't even call it an MP3 player, if you remember, going back to that period. So what are you? Is that an exception to the rule, or is it what we should be doing all the time?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I get this question a lot because he said, "Yeah, I don't believe in research, right?" And and I understand, because if you're, it's that famous line, if you asked Henry Ford, if you asked them, they'd want a faster horse rather than a car, right? So, but and so when you're talking about stuff that is truly breakthrough and truly revolutionary, as many of his products were, it's pretty hard to research them, right? Yeah, and you kind of frankly make some prototypes and let people use them and see what they think. That's the kind of research you should be doing with truly innovative breakthrough products. Most products, not that they're just line extensions, but they're mashups of different products. Dave Moran, one of your former guests, we talked about this appearance today, and he was talking about Lunchables, right? And that was sort of a mashup of, it was convenient. You have a sandwich and you have a dessert, and but that was an important CPG product, and that became a $500 million business because it combined these things, and it met a true consumer need, which was convenience for the mom, and kids loved it. So my feeling is that talk about all the elements that you have to get right: the price, the package, the promotion, the positioning, where it's placed, how it's distributed. You need to get all those elements right for two reasons. One is if you don't, you're going to have a failure, and we can talk about some of our failures. But as important, integrate the brand, right? I mean, if you have a Chips Ahoy cookie and we helped them invent brownie Chips Ahoy, if you don't get it right, and it's a big failure in the marketplace, that's not good, So and we get it right by iteratively talking to consumers. We go back and forth, and you do that 3 or 4 times in qualitative research. At some point, you're going to figure out whether you really got something or not.
Yeah. So in your book, you identify the 5 big idea thinking strategies for entrepreneurs, right?
Yep.
What are these, and how do you know they work?
Yeah, I mean, if you watch Shark Tank, the number one is find a problem and solve it, right? And so the technique in the book there is, okay, it's like writing a comedy routine. If you're not taking notes down, you're not going to get triggered for ideas. So it's part of the process there is to write down, over a few days, 20 different problems. So what are some problems? I'm sweating a little bit on TV right now, so that's a problem. I can't breathe well at night, and so that leads to breathe right nasal strips. I mean, I can't tell if the chicken in the refrigerator is spoiled, and so I smell it, but maybe there's a spoil meter, et cetera, et cetera. It can be these little everyday problems that can lead to huge businesses. Breathe right nasal strips is a $100 million business. So that's one strategy. One of my favorites is adaptive technology. So what you do is you just become very aware of all the technologies that are out there. In the book, I give an example of a guy who created a $12 bike. He used specially treated cardboard that would not disintegrate in the rain, and was able to create a bicycle that could be made for $12, right? Well, if you read that and you're creative and you're looking for opportunities, you say, well, what other ways can I use that treated cardboard to create new inventions? So this could be, it could be examples I gave in the book. I think I called it a recreation center, a fun center, or something, where you have, carts for kids. What do we call them? Strollers, right? You could do a stroller that's like disposable almost, right? And the kid can draw a thing. Or you could take cardboard and you can make flip-flops out of it. And maybe you imprint the kid's name on the bottom of the flip-flop. So when they're walking in the sand, it leaves their footprints, it leaves their name in the sand. So if they walk off, you can track them down, literally, et cetera, et cetera. So is to be aware of technological advances and use those to create new products. And then, of course, self-actualizing, helping people self-actualize in this time is a huge opportunity. Lumosity or whatever, did these brain tests to help people self-actualize. Saving money is always a good one, and saving people time is always another good one. And there are examples in throughout the book, because I gave myself the challenge when I wrote that book. I said, if this that I'm going to create really works, I should be able to work it on myself and come up with a big idea every day, which is what I did. One of the best, I thought, new services that I'm sure will appear shortly if it hasn't already. I read an article in the Times about how people are becoming, medical tourists, right? They go get operations overseas. Well, I came up with a dozen or 20 different ways to exploit that here in the U.S. by offering a service around being able to get cheaper operations overseas, for instance.
I mean, I can tell you, like, even at least in the past 20 years, with all of the different types of challenges we've had as human beings, right? We had the 9/11, then we had the recession, then we had the global recession, the financial meltdown, and now we're going through a pandemic, right? Yeah. every one of those every one of those periods, I think, generated an amazing amount of innovation for people who actually took it and said, oh, you know what, adversity, here's an opportunity for me to take that adversity and turn it into an opportunity, right? For example, I mean, I'll give you an example of a company that it's in everybody's mouth right now, including my grandmother, right? Is Zoom. Let's have a Zoom call, right?
Yep.
I've been using Zoom for 3 years. Nobody knew about Zoom. Everybody used WebEx. I had some issues with WebEx, so I pivoted towards an alternative, and I went with Zoom, and it was pretty reliable for me. So that's what I started using, right? And then they went from having 10 million active users in a month. I think that was their peak. During pandemic, I think it jumped to like 200 million, including the education system using it to deliver classes, for teachers to deliver classes to their students and stuff like that. So it's the stuff like that you take where you think it's adversity, you turn it into an opportunity. And it could be even, it's interesting, you're talking about the self-actualization, right? I might have some sort of a disability or handicap or anything like that, that if I look at it and beat myself up and say, oh, and turn it into an opportunity. So I'm not only helping myself, but I'm helping 5 million other people.
Yeah. Well, I actually wanted to talk about your Zoom thing, because in my world, we were facilitating 100 ideation sessions a year, right? And obviously these were all in-person sessions before the pandemic. But so what do you do? And thank goodness the technology showed up in time, because we now have become, quote, experts at doing virtual ideation sessions. And as it turns out, an article I wrote about that, there are actually some advantages to it. And so that's a case of, having to pivot, but leveraging the technology exists and exploiting that. Absolutely.
I mean, I think technology helped us during this period speed up a lot of things, and the adoption rate of technology across the masses, not just tech people, niche people, agency people, but across the board, everybody, right? That even news anchors were giving their news. And it's funny, when I see the news clips, I actually can tell if they're using Skype, Google Meet. I can tell just because I have that eye. I know that's what they're using. And news anchors are using that, and they're using their phone to report. At the end of the day, the reporting is more important than fancy equipment, in that scenario. And I see that the adoption has gone, like the stuff that I would experience, and I would think that I would experience the adoption in, let's say, 15 years from now, it caught up in 2020. I was expecting it in 2035,
Yeah, well, I mean, education is a perfect example. I mean, it's been ripe for disruption, but because of the pandemic, the disruption is occurring so much faster. And so, education will never be the same as a result of the pandemic, because we've been forced to speed it up. Their parents are not happy paying 60, 70 grand a year to have their kids be on Zoom calls, So the universities have to reinvent themselves based on what technology is enabling now.
Yeah, I mean, if you're paying, to your point, like a massive tuition, right?
Yep.
Versus, there have been universities that have existed, like University of Phoenix, as an example, has existed for a long while as an online school, primarily for people who work and they want to have an opportunity to educate themselves on their own time, not having to attend class and stuff like that. It's funny that now the entire world is an online university called Zoom University.
Yeah, I mean, my one of my daughters is at an online university, and the other is getting her master's in instructional design. She actually works for a company that creates online courses. She's getting her master's at Northeastern, and of course they're all virtual. Obviously, right? So
yeah, it's funny in New York when we were opening up, we wanted to do half and half, because my kids go to college too. They're almost ready to graduate, initially, when we got the first alert, it said, "Oh, it's going to be hybrid model. Half of courses will be at home, and the other half would be in person. And then the first day of school started, some of those classes that were supposed to be, in person got canceled. And they said, here's the alternative. Everybody's going to go on online learning, because we're not expecting anybody to come into the campus, and then 100% it went offline, or actually online in that scenario. One thing I want to, one value that I like delivering to the audience is actually working through an actual example where we can take them through your process, and you have like 33 or 35 of the Fortune 100 companies, right, in your portfolio. You can, it's to your choosing, whichever one you like to choose. Let's walk them through like a new product success that was created using your process in your tenure.
Okay, so maybe I could talk about Brownie Chips Ahoy. I could talk about Craftsman laser etch sockets. I could talk about Entenmann's mini cakes. But maybe I will talk about the Craftsman project. We got some tool guys out there, I'm sure. That was a really fun one. They came to us and said, ratchets, wrenches, and sockets is a huge business. It's, $300 million business. Actually, Danaher made the tools for Craftsman at the time. And so they were our client. They supplied them to Sears. Reinvent this whole world of ratchets, wrenches, and sockets, because it's kind of a mess. You go in there and you say, do I get the 120 piece count? Do I get the 250 piece count? But it's a hugely profitable business. We couldn't understand that, by the way, because they have lifetime guarantees on this. If the thing breaks, you bring it in. But the way we actually did several things for them. One of those, by the way, when we start, we will often talk to experts or heavy users to help educate us. So we went and talked to mechanics and guys who really knew a lot about using ratchets, wrenches, and sockets. But then what we did, which might be interest to the audience, we talked to, oh my gosh, probably 10 or 15 different groups of people. So female women who use tools, and that's become a huge trend, right? What are the problems they have? What are the needs? What are the wishes that they have? And by the way, the women would say to their husbands, don't touch my tools. They would get the tool set, and they say, don't touch my tools. But maybe they need to be lighter or, easier for the hand or whatever. We talked to tuners, guys who are in the business they tune up their cars, or Hispanic guys who use it as a social event often, to sit around with the guys who are drinking beers, and a lot of these guys are cars. But then we also find that there are motorcycle guys who want specific tools for them, or boat guys who want specific ratchets, wrenches, and such. So in itself created dozens and dozens of opportunities. Another one was, different wishes or segments. So one of them was a gift set. Somebody moves in the neighborhood, you get a $25, $50 gift set that you can give to somebody, et cetera, et cetera. So we created, frankly, dozens and dozens of new products, ones that'll fit appropriately in your truck, right? Because now people want 2 and 3 and 4 sets of these tools. So that was pretty straightforward, but boy, it was a lot of fun building these sets. The one new product that I'll share that's really cool was, you can imagine yourself, you're fixing your car, you're underneath it, right? And what's the deal? Yeah, give me a 3/8 socket, right? And what's the problem? If we go back to this problem thing, what's the problem when you're under your car? The problem is that in a lot of cases, you can't read the damn size, right? They're stamped in, they're really small. And you can't, well, geez, what, is that a 3/8 or a 1/4? I can't really tell, right? And so the company had developed, quote, laser etch sockets. And so the size is huge, right? And we brought this to the buyer at Sears, and it would be, 10 to 15% more, right? And he said, people are not going to pay that much more for these. And so we're not really interested. But we said, wait a second, I tell you what, let's do some qualitative. You sit in the back room and we'll bring in some consumers and see what they think. And the consumers went crazy. They said, oh my gosh, you've solved oh my God, 100% more. I'd pay 30, 40, 50% more. And so they went crazy. And to the buyer's credit, he said, wow. And so he then he launched them. They launched right away, and it became a big success for them. So that's, I think, a good example. Some of the principle, and we had wish techniques, we had customer role plays. That was a really good combination of the qualitative research and the different ideation techniques we used. But I think it's a really good example too of how important it is to go talk to consumers, because they can be an ally. Frankly, if you're at a big corporation and you're trying to get some people to say yes to one of your projects, if you have some consumer research and enthusiasm and passion, you can often talk them into that.
I mean, given the world that we live in right now, that makes it so much easier. I mean, you could create a virtual product, right? It's not even real. You have a nice photograph, you have nice 3D animation, you add and see, and a landing page, see what people you go like, we're working on this, and the entire platform of Kickstarter is based on that, basically, right? Yes, we want to create this thing, right? If you believe in the video and the photos that we're showing you in the description, if you believe in that, support us so that we can make this thing, right? Whatever that thing is, right? So in this day and age, for you to take an idea and test it, even as an entrepreneur, right? And, to kind of see, is it going to work? It's a lot easier to do that today with all of the digital tools that are at your disposal now, and audiences that you could go after.
Absolutely. So, a day of classic qualitative research might be 20 grand. Well, as an entrepreneur, you certainly don't have to do that. First of all, you can make, we call them ugly prototypes, right? And we have our clients, like we were working with Dr. Scholl's inventing new inserts, and these were, Dreamwalk, fresh and cool insoles and all this kind of, a lot of really cool stuff came out of that work. And they said to us, yeah, we can 3D print prototypes for you guys. And then we said, no, we don't want that. Those are too finished. We want what we call prototypes. So we make them out of cardboard and tape, and duct tape. Now, why would we do that? It's because if the prototype is too finished, people say, yeah, I think it should be red versus blue. You're not getting good insights. If it's ugly, they'll say, oh yeah, you should move that a little bit, make that higher. I want to make sure it goes around my arch, whatever it is. And so for consumers, or entrepreneurs, it's easy to do these ugly prototypes now. Now the other thing is, you're absolutely right. There are tremendous services. One of them is 1Q. We tested concepts with them because they have you test the concepts on smartphones. We've given them a concept to test, and we had a full study and report after. You know how long we got that study and report back? We had them test a concept we were working on with 200 consumers. You know how long it took us to get a full report on that test? Take a guess.
I would guess a week or two, maybe.
Yeah, it was 8 minutes.
I was close. I was close. 2 weeks is 8 minutes.
It was 8 minutes because they have a panel of 1 million consumers with smartphones. They put it out there. The 200 consumers responded. They had the results. It went into their algorithm and template, and we got the report back 8 minutes later. So that's how, and it's cheap. It might be $200 or $400 or $500 to test that. So the world of testing has changed dramatically also, as you can imagine, and it really helped do our work, quicker, faster, better, cheaper.
So it's great that we're talking about successes, right? Now, and I know, right? Failure is part of the game, right? You have to embrace failure. Everybody says that. Gary Vee says it. You have to embrace failure and learn from it. By the way, the failure rate is for new products and services is close to 80-90%, right? Yeah. That's a humongous number. Yeah. Given the those are the kind of things you're going after, against, right? It's your 80 to 90%, but the way I look at it, 10 to 20%, it's going to succeed. So let's say 80 to 90% it fails, and people are telling me to embrace failure and learn from it. Given all of those things and your years of experience, what were some of your learning moments in your life? When things just didn't go the way you had hoped or planned, based on all of the work, all the process, everything.
Yeah, so let me set this up. So if we do an ideation session to invent a new Chips Ahoy cookie, I'm picking, sort of product, concrete examples here. We might generate 200 ideas, right, in a day, let's say. Of those, maybe 20 are really of interest, and the client says, yeah, I think there's something here. We might then bring 18 of those to testing, right? Of those 18, maybe 8 sound really, really, consumers get excited where it's meeting a different need. A lot of products fail because it's just a little line extension. It's not, people don't care, right? In this case, the one that came out that was a huge success and became a platform was, brownie Chips Ahoy. Putting a layer of brownie inside a chocolate chip cookie. Oh my gosh, people went zoo. So we saw the passion. We knew they loved it. But that was, 1 out of 200 ideas. So just by definition, and we wouldn't have known there was great passion unless we'd gone to consumers and saw how passionate they were. Okay, so that's the first thing. You got to have a lot of ideas to get some really good ones. That's just the nature of the game. But you're not going to launch the bad ones, right? So you got to know which ones to put your chips against. So that dramatically increases your success rate. The other thing is you want to make sure you get the price and the package and the positioning and all that stuff correct. So let me give you an example of a failure that is also in the bread or dessert world. We were working on, and I can share this because this was a number of years ago, and so it's not confidential now. We were working with Thomas's English Muffins. We were their innovation agency at the time. And we had a concept that's called bagel holes. And the idea was you'd have these small holes, bagel holes, right? But in shape. So for boys, and we did a lot of testing on this, hearts, moons, and stars for girls, for little girls, and footballs, basketball, and baseballs for boys, right? And by the way, I'll never forget some consumer research we did in Columbus, Ohio, with a 4 and 5-year-olds, like they're crawling under the table, right? And this little boy said, I said, well, what do you think of these? He said, I love them. I love these. It's really cute. Anyway, so we had this unbelievably, it was a tremendous winning idea, okay? And but we could not get the price value equation right because moms don't want to spend $5 on a bunch of bagel holes that a kid's going to eat in one setting, right? She's going to buy mini bagels or big bagels that's going to last for 5 or 10 or 15 eating occasions. And we had said, we should not launch these until we get the price value equation to the point where it makes sense. And, we just, for whatever reason, we couldn't talk them out of there. And it was launched and it failed. And it broke our hearts because it's still a really great idea, but it's a matter of getting the price value equation right. The other example of a failure I'll share was just because it's Thomas's as well. It was corn English muffins, and I don't know if you've ever had a corn English muffin from Thomas's in these current times. That it's, oh my God, it's absolutely delicious. Well, we were testing these, and consumers said the same thing. Oh my God, this is unbelievable. The smells and the rooms, and they said, oh my gosh, I'll pay all this money for it. I'm excited. And we had tested, quote, lab samples, right? Mm-hmm. So all the PhD scientists and food technologists had created these unbelievable products, and that's what we were testing. They launched, though, products, mass-produced that didn't have the same quality. And so that was a tremendous learning that we have to make sure we align those. So the product failed because it wasn't good enough. But 2 years later, it was reintroduced, and we figured out how to translate the lab samples into a mass-produced product, and then it did become a big hit. So those are 2 examples of failures where it's about getting the details right. Let me give you one last one. It was for Entenmann's, also owned by Bimbo now, and they we had mini cakes, right? Because consumers didn't want to buy the big sheet cakes anymore; they wanted mini cakes. So we did those, and we had them in a circular form, right? And consumers said, these are fantastic. We love them. Would you buy them? Oh, yeah, absolutely. And then one of the food technologists at Entenmann said, I wonder if they should be square. so they look like they're cut off the cake a little bit. And we compared those and tested them, and consumers said, why would you ever do a round one? They should be square. And so that's a case where I think it would have succeeded in round, but it was the details and the continuous iterative process of testing and optimizing that led to the huge success. And if you look at the Entenmann shelf now, most of their product, or many of them, are handheld now. So
very cool. Now, while you were talking about failure, one thing that came to my mind is there has been a lot of interesting innovation when the original intent, right, the original new product that some company wanted to come up with failed, right, 100% failed. But what it ended up producing is some sort of either a byproduct or completely a different product that they had never intended for that product to exist at all. I mean, there are so many examples of it, like, a donut and a donut hole, right? Those being thrown out and turning into what do you call those? I don't eat that stuff, so I don't know. The donut holes are called what? Muffins? Munchkins, right?
Munchkins from Dunkin' Donuts or whatever. Yep.
So, have you seen, like, when those kinds of things, those kind of insights come through either through very careful observation when you are going through the project, or people writing off that, oh no, it was a failure. The original thing we said was a failure, right? Versus, observing and then postmortem, right? Like, why did it fail? What did we learn from this process and stuff like that,
one of the, and this is not exactly what you're talking about, but it's a good example of sort of not giving up and taking bad news. And it's all about the learning, frankly. What did you learn from the experience of what you were doing? We were working with Schick, and we were doing innovation audits and new product work for them. And the people there had invented the Intuition razor for women, and they were trying to get the management to launch this thing, and they wouldn't. And so they would do a lot of testing and get all kinds of failures. But internally, which was really smart, they didn't report the failures to senior management. They just, they took that as learning, and then would sort of report and let go through the grapevine of the organization, oh, this was a big success, and that was a success, and the name tested well, and all the rest. And so when there became a hole in the launch calendar, the senior manager said, hey, I've heard good things about that Intuition razor. Maybe we should go launch that. Well, if they hadn't been very clever about, not hiding their failures, but using their failures as learning opportunities, that thing never would have made it to market, and it became one of their most successful new products in the past 10 years. So the point here, I think, for the listeners is that this new product development is an iterative process, and every step of the way should be seen as learning in all facets of the product. Absolutely.
And not just the product, but also the process. Like, when you go through a certain process, even though the product that you were trying to push for failed, but what happened was that process from point A to point B, when you had to tweak it in order to get some sort of output, you improved it by 25%. And wow, that's incredible. Now your production is so much faster, and you're producing things more efficiently. You should be mindful of those kinds of things too, not just go like, oh, this, I needed to create this light bulb, it failed, that's it. I should just give up and go home,
Yeah, I mean, like a good example of that was my business partner and Engine co-founder, Gary Fraser, when he did Mentadent toothpaste for Unilever, and it became product of the year, and it became a $250 million business. They had all these problems come up, and one of them was, there's too much plastic in this thing. It was dual delivery system. And so they took that problem as an opportunity, and they said, let's invent refills. And the refill business, to your point, because they were creative at each step of the way and used these processes to come up with new ideas, the refill business, it became the biggest refill product in the history of health and beauty care products, because they were smart enough to say, okay, we got a problem, let's go solve it, let's be creative about that. Another example, when, again, because of the innovation agency work we did with Thomas's, and now Bimbo, and they own Arnold and Freihofer's and Stroman and Sara Lee, they own all those brands. One of the problems was that people shop automatically for new products at a supermarket. Like if you want bread, you don't even look. You're sort of grab and go, right? And so we said, well, that's a big problem, because in the case of Thomas's, over half their consumers knew they made English muffins, but they didn't know they made prepackaged bagels. They're the largest prepackaged bagel company in the country. Half their consumers didn't know it. Oh my God, what a problem, right? So, but that's an opportunity. So we went to Walmart and they created in 250 supercenters a display that said, "What's hot in baking?" And it became an opportunity to highlight their new products to stop that automatic grab and go shopping behavior. The bigger point here, Sabir, is that all these problems, if you see them as creative opportunities and learning opportunities, that's really what innovation is about. And all the techniques we use can be used not only to come up with the big idea, but to solve those problems as you go down the innovation process is the point.
Well, when do you, in your process, when do you tackle, let's say, you have the scientist, the inventor, sitting there tinkering, doing their thing, right?
Yep.
They're doing their thing, but there's a whole other skill set to understand product positioning, how to even name the product. Like, why would people, because even, there are examples of like Ford Nova, right?
Yes.
You can't sell that in South. You can't sell that in South America, right? So even Ford has had challenges, right? So it's not kind of foreign thing, but it's something that in that process, where do you and when do you consider product positioning and also the other ancillary things that has nothing to do with invention, but it's part of the invention process and innovation process, like product naming is an example,
Yeah, geez, we've done a lot of naming, and naming is really tough, as I'm sure you know, and I'm sure the listeners know. I tell this story of trying to name a new strawberry and fudge ice cream for Ben & Jerry's, and it was a full day new product ideation session to invent novelties, like not bonbons, but Ben-Bens, so that's a cool idea, right? Anyway, we had a half hour to name this new strawberry and fudge ice cream. So the way we did that was, I said, well, what's the essence of Ben & Jerry's? I said, well, it's all about, they're anti-authoritarian. So I said, what could be some anti-authoritarian triggers? Because I knew I had to trigger the people because we only had a half hour. So the way I triggered them with anti-authoritarian words. In this case, it was slang. And so I got slang dictionaries, cut them up into pieces, passed those out, and used those to trigger names. And that led to the name Staffu, strawberries naturally all fudged up, which became a huge, a success for them. And we did it in a half hour. The point there, though, was we had to use, and this is true of all our ideation work, you've got to use stimuli to trigger people's brains. Now, to answer your question about when do you do this stuff, I think it's really, really important, if you can pull it off, to have cross-functional teams involved from the very beginning of the process. So you want the engineers, you want the finance guys in there, you want the sales guys in there to have been part of the, certainly the ideation, but then as you work through this process, to have them be part of the team so they can input and give you your ideas as you're working through it. Now you need specialists, obviously. You need marketing people, you need salespeople, you need the food technologists, you need the engineers. They all need to be part of this team if you're going to succeed with it. And if you're an entrepreneur, you just got to go find these people. You get your third cousin who's a mechanic to make this thing for you or whatever, right? That's what being an entrepreneur is all about. But in corporate America, it's critical to get your these cross-function, get as many people as you can involved so they feel ownership and passion and will help you solve this thing. When Gary was doing Mentadent, they couldn't figure out how to make the container. The engineers couldn't solve it. Well, the guys on the line solved it, right? How to manufacture this thing. So that's critical. It's the cross functionality that you want. That'll help you succeed at the end of the day.
One of the other things that I see when you have that brainstorming session in your organization, whether it's for new product, new service, or even solving problems, right?
Yep.
It tends, you have, there are different labels for people, right? People who are very proactive and they speak up in groups versus people who are very passive and they think more and they internalize it. They write their thoughts down before saying the one word.
Yes.
Like there are different personalities, but I'm not saying that one does a better job than the other. You need both. You want the person keep on putting stuff up on the whiteboard, right?
Yes.
And you also need the person who is very thoughtful about what they will say, the next thing that's coming out of their mouth. When you have these kind of brainstorming sessions, and especially in a scenario where you have cross-functional teams, how do you, like, one of the things I learned, I worked with Gary Vaynerchuk at VaynerMedia, right?
Yep. Yep.
And the team there actually does a phenomenal job whenever we did brainstorming. It didn't matter if your title had a C-level title or SVP, or you were the most junior person, right? Or an intern, doesn't matter, right? The idea has to stand by itself, and no idea is really bad. We're just brainstorming. Let's put this stuff up on the board.
Yep.
And the way what they want you to do is they would like you to actually add on to whatever has been said, not replace it, not go like, oh, that's a stupid idea. Don't just erase that from the whiteboard. You don't want that person in the room, because the thing is, it's supposed to be more productive and very open, so that you never know where the idea is going to come from. Otherwise, you shut down people too. When somebody gets up and goes like, that's so stupid, it's wrong, whatever, I don't know why we're doing this. That's a lot of negativity. So what kind of, from a people standpoint, because that people always get in the way, So from a people standpoint, what are your thoughts about the process of ideation and brainstorming and such?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question, because I've spent my whole career trying to solve those kinds of problems, the introverts and extroverts, and the senior vice president versus the intern, and all those kind of things. And one of the tricks we use, for instance, is, well, first of all, you need stimuli. So you need to trigger people's brains with all the stimuli. We can talk about that. Not unlike the slang dictionary to trigger connections. But beyond that, for instance, we created a technique called triggered brainwalking. And we'll start, 80 or 90% of our sessions with these. What we'll do is we'll create ideation stations around the room. So if you have 20 people in the room, we might have 10 ideation stations. 2 people go to each station, and maybe you trigger them with wishes or role plays or picture prompts or whatever against the challenge you're working on. They write ideas down, right? So it's just the 2 of them. And so the introverts love that, because they're not, they don't feel embarrassed or afraid to write ideas down. And also the extroverts are not taking over the meeting, right? So they're at their station. So everybody writes some ideas down. Then you rotate, like idea volleyball. You rotate again. You rotate 4 or 5 times. You got 10 stations. All of a sudden you have 50 ideas in about 15 minutes, right? Then you go back to your original station, look at some of the builds that the other people had, you circle those ideas, and then that team can share their ideas with the group as a whole. And then to your Sabir, then you start building together. That bit about your thought about no bad ideas, then you build on them. And so that's a trick we will often use to make sure that the introverts have as much or are able to be as productive as the extroverts. The simple recommendation here is continually do team breakouts. And that way you optimize the introvert extrovert thing, and you're getting all kinds of ideas. And you want to change it. So a different technique, and next time you use, semantic intuition, word combination technique, next time you use picture prompts, and then you change the group. So, in Brainwalk, you had 2 people. You break out with picture prompts or trend triggers, and you have 3 or 4 people. Then you do it with 6 people, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's the dynamic of changing who's working with whom that gets over the issue you're talking about.
So one of the things that happens is bound to happen in this process, right?
Yeah.
I'm stuck. What do I do? I'm stuck. So what are some of the techniques that you would recommend for me to get unstuck, or for my team to get unstuck when we get stuck with ideation?
We've got dozens of them, but one of the easiest and most fun ones is if they're really stuck. I mean, hopelessly stuck, ready to kill each other because they're stuck. You can leverage that feeling in the room of failure, if you will, and use a technique we created called worst idea technique. So, okay, stop. I want you to come up with not good ideas now, but the worst possible ideas you can think of. So, oh my gosh, well, we could shoot the person. Okay, what else could you shoot him and kidnap him? Okay, what else? Shoot him and kidnap and tie him up and then ransom him. Okay, until you get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and maybe generate 20 of those terrible ideas. And then what do? You go back and you look at those terrible ideas and say, as bad as it is, can we somehow use that as inspiration to turn into a good idea? And there are two strategies for doing that. The lights went on. The two strategies for doing that. One is do the opposite, which is not always possible or interesting. What's the opposite of kidnap him? Don't kidnap him. It's not that interesting. The more interesting one
offline,
is
by the way, Brian, offline, you and I will talk about why you're using that example.
Okay. Great. So then, as you say, as bad as it is, what can I turn out into a good idea? So if it were, throw up soup, well, maybe that leads to the idea of a soup for patients who can't keep something down, or soup with body parts in it. Maybe that becomes a zombie Halloween soup, et cetera, et cetera. And I tell you, as frivolous as this sounds and ridiculous, it's a very effective and productive technique for generating big ideas. I'll give you one other version that we created off of that. We're working with the ASPCA in New York City on getting, it's a long story, I'll make it short, but it was how to get New Yorkers to adopt ex-drug dealers' pit bulls who'd been retrained. Good luck with that, right? That's a marketing challenge. And instead of worst we changed it because we kill the dog. We don't want to do that. We did silly idea. So that's another version of it that gives people the freedom to just be as creative as silly. Well, we'll dress them up in costumes or, that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden you'll find that really, it almost never fails in releasing because why are you failing? You're failing because you've thought of stuff before, you're not thinking differently, because there's fear factor, because you don't have stimuli, and worst idea and silly idea work at all those levels to break through in people's brains. And then this is just one of dozens we use, but that's a really good example, I think.
I mean, one example I've used with my clients as well as other companies that is to think about what would put us out of business.
Great, love it.
Yes. What would put us out of business? Let's think and reverse engineer. Like, what can we do? Like, let's say if we were the competition of our company.
Yes.
What
absolutely.
can we do to put us out of business? Let's go through that thought process. And then when you go through that thought process, first it shocks you, right? Yeah. Oh my God, I don't want to lose my job, right?
Right.
And we don't want thousands of people or hundreds of people to lose their job. And then you start thinking about all of the things that maybe competitors or maybe adjacent industries are doing to your industry that you could learn from. You start thinking about those kinds of things, and now something that you were stuck, it helps you unstuck. And yes. Plus, it might even in that process give you very innovative ideas that you may abandon the original idea that you were doing, and you might, you said earlier, it's 200 ideas. It's not one, it's.
And I love that. So thank you for sharing that. Two versions, other ways to do that technique. One is to say, if we did a joint venture with somebody, if we did a joint venture with LinkedIn or Amazon or whomever, what products or services could we create? So that's another version of what you're talking about. And the one that we use quite a bit, this is a program we offer. It's called Disruptive Wargaming, where we have companies role play the competition. And this is usually a 2-day event, sometimes with 30 to 50 people, and we create teams. So a good example of this was VSP. They're the largest vision care insurance company. And so, they had record sales. How do you get them to change when you have record sales? It's almost impossible. We did disruptive wargaming sessions where we had them role-playing Amazon, Google, and Walmart in addition to their classic competitors, Luxottica, Essilor, et cetera. And those teams, by the way, the teams really get into it. Like the Amazon team, one guy gets to be Jeff Bezos. They use drones to spy on the other teams. It's fun. But they figure out what their strategies would be if they entered the vision care insurance business. And you quickly realize when they're role playing that, oh my gosh, if Amazon entered this business or Walmart or Google, they could put us out of business. And so therefore you develop competitive strategies and new projects to deal with that. And it's unbelievably powerful, again, especially if you have people and companies that are extraordinarily successful and not that open or willing to change. After they do this exercise, I will tell you, a bunch of us salespeople came, oh my God, I had no idea. I'm going to sell in an entire, because I realized we have to be closer and more humble with our clients about the services we offer.
Well, Bryan, thank you so much for sharing so much knowledge and dropping so much knowledge on the process.
We're just getting started. I feel like we're just getting started.
Yeah, we will definitely do another session. What I would ask you, and you have delivered tremendous amount of value here. What is your number one, based on your years of experience? What is your number one $100,000 expert insight into the creation process and launch process of new products and services? What's your number one?
I think number one is your idea should be 20 ideas. That's the first thing, because I see so many entrepreneurs, they have one idea, committed to that one idea. Not that they shouldn't be committed, and it should be an area of passion for sure. It's something you should be passionate about. That just one idea, you're much less likely to change because you're so invested in that one idea. So you may get 5 or 10 ideas around the same area. And one way to do that is to think of who, when, hows, and whys, for instance. Could we have a different who, different people we're selling to, different way we're distributing, et cetera, et cetera. So even if it's just one idea, have 20 versions of that idea, so that when you go out to test that idea, you're actually out there trying to learn about what people really want rather than trying to sell them on your idea. Because if they don't like your idea, you're out of business. You don't have anything, right? So my biggest piece of advice is, have more. And then the subset of that, an important element of that, is when you go talk to people, you're out there to learn, and you have to be humble and open and willing to take really negative feedback. But the point then is to use that negative feedback to maybe evolve your idea, as you were saying before, in that could be really great. And boy, I'll tell you, when you get something's really great and people are passionate and excited, we saw this with Ahoy, and people saying, I do research. I say, well, what do you want Chips Ahoy? Why would you buy that? I actually ran into a consumer at the shop at the store who was buying it. I said, why'd you buy it? She goes, she was an idiot, and she said, it's a brown chocolate chip cookie. So I mean, what more do you want? And so you see passion and interest and energy. And if you don't have that for your new product and service, you may not be done. And so the single most important piece of advice is spend more time up front in the ideation phase, rather than going prematurely to launch. It's like the Warby Parker guys. They spend months and months figuring out the position before they launched. And so that's my biggest piece of advice for people.
Thank you, Bryan, for being a guest on the show. Really appreciate you and all of the advice that you have given us. And thank you, audience, for joining us. I would again recommend checking out both of these books. These both are phenomenal books. It's well worth having it in your library and reading it. I think it's also available. I saw that it's available on Audible too. So if you like audiobooks, you can listen to it also.
Idea Stormers is the one that's on Audible. That's the master work for people within corporations and their teams. That book is particularly good for them. That's the one that's on Audible. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you, Bryan, and thank you, audience. So until next time, audience, keep on checking out all of our episodes on This Week with Sabir. I'm going to keep on producing them, and hope I'm bringing a lot of value to your knowledge. Thank you, and thank you, Bryan.